Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Bryan. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. So back by popular demand is John O'Connor, who we just did an interview with a couple months ago called Man Talk with an Exceptional Men's Coach featuring John O'Connor. John has been a coach to both Bryan and I. He is currently coaching Bryan, I think, for over a year and a half now. I worked with John for a period of 3 years that helped me to transition from my corporate world into this new world of entrepreneurship. He's an expert in men's work. He was the one who got me interested in men's work. And in this episode, we dive deep into the realities of our ever-changing days and how we as men can show up as the best version of ourselves in this era of uncertainty. So in this episode, we talk about why we now need to update our maps of reality on a daily basis, how to create certainty when everything else is uncertain. John gives us a process for inspecting fear to reduce its grip on you, how to implement new systems of communication with your family, who is now around more often than you've probably ever been used to, how to maintain stability when a family member, friend, or business partner is panicking, and how to contemplate how you want to look back on yourself a year from now and being proud of how you showed up today. Enjoy this episode, Fear, Fortitude, and Family with John O'Connor. Yeah, we were just pre-gaming our strategy for this conversation, and John informed us he's only a quarter of the way through his coffee and his brain isn't even on yet. So I just want to manage the expectations for, at least from John's end, to be quite low, because when John is not caffeinated, it takes him a little while to warm up.
Well, let me give you some context too. So I have a family of 5, and today is the first day of homeschooling where my son goes to a Waldorf school, which if you don't know Waldorf, it's a digital free. He's in 3rd grade. They don't use devices, electronics. There's no television. And so switching to a remote learning via Google Classroom for a bunch of kids who are not allowed to be on digital devices is very, very challenging this morning. And we were trying to run my son's first lesson while our au pair is cooking and my son's on the phone in the kitchen. So it was just pandemonium and chaos. So
Chaos.
And my son's easily distracted. So it was chaos this morning.
I think it's actually irresponsible of you to not caffeinate before all of that happened, John.
Well, it was up until 1 trying to set up I have an extra computer to be his workstation, and putting parental controls so he doesn't go on YouTube or accidentally scroll to porn is really hard. To actually go, how do I block all porn sites? So I had to Google that and get some apps that I installed because, he's a curious little 8-year-old who just gets into everything. So, I had to set the computers up till 1 o'clock last night. It's hard because it's the new normal right now. Yeah. And I asked his teacher last night, I said, is this, obviously you can't answer this and nobody can, but how long are we doing remote learning? Nobody knows, but my sense is it's going to be probably for the rest of the year. But that's what we're planning for. Is that this is going to be a 3-month, just psychologically, instead of saying, oh, it's just 2 weeks or it's just going to be a short amount of time. Yeah, I have a lot of experience with setting up an expectation of something being 2 weeks. And when it's 2 months, it's painful from 2 weeks on. So we've just been really kind of opening up the frame to say this is something that we're going to settle into for the long haul. Yeah. And then if it's shorter, fantastic. But I'm not going to set my expectations up to be 2 weeks and then he's out back to school and then it's 2 months or 3 months.
Yeah, I feel you.
I'm going to sip some more coffee here.
Yeah, do that. We'll give you a break for a moment. Bryan, how you doing today, buddy?
Good. I thought we were starting with Kegels today.
I've been doing them since John was talking, so I don't know.
Got it. Okay, cool. I'm doing good this morning. I am halfway through. Great, by
the way, I mean, you really clean up well during this sort of shutdown.
If I'm being honest, I didn't realize that we were interviewing John today. I thought we were interviewing Alexa Martinez, who we're interviewing tomorrow. And
today.
Alexa and I used to date, so I wanted to look decent. That said, John, I would have done my hair for you too. So I appreciate the shout out there.
Yeah, Bryan sent me a picture this morning that made me literally laugh out loud. So why don't you just share the quick story, Bryan, of how you and Becca are now adjusting to your confinement to home?
So Becca is on, I wouldn't say the front line, because I look at our healthcare providers as being on the front line when it comes to COVID-19 coronavirus. But I would say Becca is on the next line because she's a healthcare attorney, and with all the new guidance coming out through the federal government of how we can operate medicine, like, do you need a license? Can you work across state lines? Can we use things like telemedicine in different ways? Right? They're coming out with all new rules. And so as a healthcare attorney, she's having to meet with all these companies that are asking, like, what is this new legal guidance? How do we operate? And so she's been either on the phone or, in emails or documentation, what seems like 24/7 for the past several days. So what we have set up in our house is we've got a second bedroom. That's where I'm at right now, where I'm doing the majority of my work. She likes to work in the kitchen. So when I take a break after a phone call or a podcast recording, I go in there and I go to get a drink or get some food. And of course, I want to connect with her. And so I'll touch her shoulder. I'll say, hey, how you doing? What's going on? What's new? I'll give her a kiss. And finally, at the end of last night, she got tired of that because I was interrupting her flow. And she's like, look, I get annoyed and I feel like it might be even a little bit selfish of you to just come into my space and cause a ruckus. She's like, if you want to get a drink, if you want to turn the TV on, if you want to dance, like, go ahead, but just don't interrupt my flow. And I said, okay, so that's fair. But I don't know when, like, it feels weird to not say hi to you. So I don't know when, like, when do I like kiss you and like nuzzle up on you versus when do I do nothing? And so we came up with a system where she has a little Post-it note that she puts on our computer that just says, shut up. And if I see the Post-it note, like a little flag, then I know that it's a no interruption time. I also wrote a second Post-it note that says, I love you. And that was just for me. And I put that up there too. So I feel good about it.
Yeah, here's the thing. Bryan sends me a picture this morning and it's of Becca sitting in front of her computer. So it's taken from the back and it has like a little Post-it note on the left that says, shut up. And on the right, I love you. And I laughed because I was like, I thought Becca had written those Post-it notes. Bryan was the one who had written those Post-it notes as a command to himself and also to remind himself that he's loved, which makes it even funnier, man.
It's interesting. My wife and I both work from home. And that is a big challenge for us, is that there are times when I get into these deep internal states where I'm working on something and I'm thinking about something and I'm kind of iterating it in my mind. And she comes in and she's like, she'll ask something random and I get annoyed because my brain reorients to her conversation and then I can't get back into where I was. So
right.
And also the way that my brain works is like I'm easily distracted. So when I get in and I'm focused, I'm like, oh, it's so good. I'm focused. And then all of a sudden it's like some random thing that comes into my space. So that's been a challenge for us. It's definitely. And then for a while, she's just like, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I never know when to talk to you. So it can go to the extreme of that.
Yeah.
So we've been learning how to just kind of give each other space during the day. And I'm sure a lot of people are going through the same challenge of how do we cohabitate 24 hours a day and try to get stuff done. It's like there's a whole new paradigm.
Yeah. Bryan, you texted this morning saying the answer now is developing better systems, right? Systems that help us in this new environment. And you reminded me of one of our earlier podcasts that we did with Nir Eyal, who wrote the book Indistractable, which became, I think, a Wall Street Journal bestseller. And he had that technique of putting a place card like on your laptop that just says like work in progress. And that's the signal. If someone else comes in and they see that, to not be interrupted. Because I'm the same way, man. If I had a partner living with me and every time she walked through the kitchen and she was kissing me and saying hello and disrupting my flow, like it would drive me nuts, drive me crazy. So like, oh my God. And then chill. Yeah, I can't even, you're on your own, buddy. I don't know anything about that.
Coloring on it.
Well, it's awesome to be able to get all three of us on this conversation together because I want to talk about like what are some of the issues that men are facing right now as we are at the early stages of coming into lockdown, self-containment, social distancing. And John, one of the things that you and I talked about the other day when you just called me up, and I think it was Monday, and you work with 25 one-on-one clients, many of whom are business owners who are freaking out right now. Like there's a lot of unprecedented.
There's a spectrum. Yeah. There's a huge spectrum of experience. It seems like from the fear, frozen, reactive, all the way to the, this is the way it is, and here's what I need to do, and the responsive opportunity, curiosity state. And it's the whole gamut in between, because every business is different.
Yeah.
So.
And by the way, like, no judgment on how someone's reacting right now too, because like these are unprecedented times, and some businesses like right now or some positions that men are holding right now are disproportionately affected by where we are right now. So there's no judgment in how a man is reacting right now. But I think what we want to do is really speak to what are the spectrum of emotions that are showing up right now, and how can we, through this conversation, maybe provide a little bit of stability and guidance.
Well, it's funny. I was remembering the first men's retreat that we did 3 years ago. And then I think I did the Atlas exercise where we had to squat down, put our hands over our head for 20 minutes. Right. And after about 3 minutes, everybody was shaking. And the point of it was like, what is your internal experience when the shit gets hot inside? When you go beyond, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. What do you do? And I think I had put in a little clause. I said, if you need to come out, you can come out, but it's an 8-second rule, right? It's the recalibration. And so you can come out, shake it off, and then go back in. Don't make a story about coming out. It only takes a few seconds to shake it off and then go back in.
Yeah.
And that exercise, for those of the men who was in that training, and I've done this exercise a few times for the open sources for every man, this is the time when shit gets really hot and you got to come out and you shake it off. You get back in. You don't make a story or a judgment or the whole narrative around what's going on. We just go back right in. And I've had to do that many times where I've just hit red line and I've had to take a deep breath, come back to center, and then go back into doing what I need to do, which is, okay, that's the first thing we talk about. Like for every one of my clients, one is grounding and getting connected to yourself, your center. And then what's the most important thing right now? Like what's on your plate? What's your landscape look? Everybody's different. I got one client yesterday said that his $200,000 a month business went to zero because he's in the sports business and he does transcriptions for all the major sporting events. He went from $200-300K a month to zero. And when I was talking to him and I'm like, how you doing? He's like, I'm at the beach. What am I going to do? Like this is just the way it is. And we'll find our way through it. Like I'm going to give everybody a week or two to kind of calibrate, and then we'll figure out what's next. But for other business owners, they have overhead of that amount, then they can't do that.
Yep.
And so they're in full action mode. So it's wide spectrum. I have no idea if I answered your question, but I'm almost done with my coffee. So
yeah. Well, one thing to add to that is during that Atlas exercise, which both Bryan and I were participating in for the first time, when you gave us that guidance of, if you need to come out, you come out, you have 8 seconds, but what is your strategy for those 8 seconds? Like, what is your restoration strategy? How are you going to strengthen so that when you come back in, you're built up? And I think about, the men that are in our mastermind, Bryan, right? There's a lot of these guys who, like, the weight of the world's on their shoulders. They have clients at work, they have families at home, and they're being looked to make all these decisions, and they're doing it well, and they're starting to feel the heat, right? And so it's like, okay, well, now when I'm feeling the pressure, I'm feeling the fear come up, what is the strategy for stepping out of the decision-making mode and restoring? I think, most of us haven't really consciously designed what our strategy is for that. I know that, the three of us have, because we're deep into this work and we've thought a lot about this. But for me, I'm speaking about this ad nauseum, but it's really like I shut off my connectivity with the outside world. Like I shut down social media and news. And I will go to the things that give me joy, because like, I just don't want to read another thing about COVID. I don't want to hear about another piece of breaking news. I need to go inward. And when that happens and my tank comes back up to full, then I can ease my way back into pose, right? The metaphorical Atlas pose, because I'm stronger now.
Mm-hmm. That's been one of my strategies as well, which is the first thing that I do is cut off all external information coming in. Yesterday, we went for a hike. I'm up in Westchester and we went across the bridge, went for a beautiful hike. It was great for about an hour until we tried to get back to the car, and they had quarantined the area around my car because someone had COVID, and they had the whole masks and the suits and the white jackets, and they're wheeling this poor guy. And it was a little over the top, but everybody had full on like contamination gear trying to get this guy into the hospital.
Wow.
So yeah, it was eerie. But, that walk for us, it was the kids were running around, playing, having fun. It was just like, that was the recalibration time.
Mm.
8 seconds is probably not enough to recalibrate at this point in time. We had a nice 90-minute recalibration. And so you brought up a really interesting point, Dom, because I started to notice. So if I think about our maps of reality and what's true, this point in time, this unprecedented time, every day my maps are becoming almost outdated. And I need to upgrade my maps in terms of like, what is true? Where am I, reorienting to new realities? And I realized if I was living my life with a map 2 weeks ago, it'd be outdated.
Yeah.
And I see some people lagging in their maps. And, my jiu-jitsu studio closed down and I was looking at the chat and there were like groups of people who were going over to each other's houses and training together. And someone said, hey, the reason why Professor closed the jiu-jitsu studio is because we're social distancing. And the other guy's like, well, listen, I'm an American. I could do whatever I want. Like, you're not an expert. And it was so interesting how some people are just like, fuck it, this is just overblown. And other people are like, yo, like, this is serious. And there's this whole spectrum. And unfortunately, look at China, they are draconian, but they got it under control because everybody had to do what they said. And I'm just looking around and people are just not social distancing and they're doing all these different things and they're cross-contaminating. And this is going to continue to go on. So the maps, like what's the map? Everybody's got different maps. Everybody's in a different place. So I've just been trying to figure out what's my map and what's the most useful, productive, curious, open map that I can create right now. I'm curious for you guys, like, what is your map right now in terms of like where we are and what you're focusing on? I love hearing other people's maps because it helps me update mine. Because I'm sure I have a couple lags in mine as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is where part of the fear comes from too. It's, well, how do our maps get updated? And largely that's coming from guidance from the CDC, from the federal government, from the news, from our peers. And there's this feeling that if I turn the news off or I don't keep consuming this, I'm going to miss something that's really important that's going to update my map.
Mm-hmm.
Dominic started this conversation with information consumption and where and when do I want to bring that in. And I think, yes, that is how we update our map, but also it doesn't need to be updated every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And so, John, to answer your question of like, where's the map coming from? I have a couple, what I consider good, non-political information sources that are the only place I go to. So I cut out going to Apple News and just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and I knocked it off. So I feel like my map is updated enough as it pertains to this, and that gives me the security to now say, great, I can take care of myself, I can take care of others, and I can go and create.
Well, that's
my map.
Yeah, one map I'm hearing that you have is, and how you're orienting is like a little bit of information every day to make sure your map's updated. That's your map in terms of how you're going to approach, right? Where some people's maps are, no, I need to go every day. And it's important for me to scroll through and see where everything is up in real time, right? So that sounds like that map's working for you, a little bit of trusted sources. Do you have a good, I'm only listening to Dr. John Campbell on YouTube from the UK. He's the only one every morning he does an update. I watch him and then that's it. That's my news source for the day.
Why him?
He's British and they have a very grounded, matter of fact, no spin, no panic, no fear. It's like, this is just the way it is. And he does a global update, which I really like because this is a global pandemic. It's not just the States. So he gives a whole global perspective every single day. And he goes through it. The way he does it is just beautiful. Check him out on YouTube, spend an hour, get updated. And then that's all you need.
That's John Campbell? John Campbell you're talking about? Okay. I love this conversation about updating maps, John. For me, the biggest update I've made to my map is I'm really ramping up my creation and communication and contribution, really. We were talking about this last night on our mastermind call with about 16 of our 20 guys. And, one of the things that like drops me into fear is when I'm consumed with myself. It's like I'm not going to have enough food, or I'm not going to have enough income. I'm going to be, as a single guy, isolated and not going to have physical contact, self. And so I start to think about the things that update my map to take me out of self. And the experiences that take me out of self are when I'm creating. It's when I'm contributing, when I'm part of community, when I'm, communicating more regularly to others. So I've been ramping up daily podcasts and just having more conversations, supporting other people who may need some stability. And those are experiences that make me feel selfless. Like when you're in the state of flow, one of the key characteristics in the state of flow is selflessness. It's selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. Those are the key characteristics of being in flow state, and end up contributing quite a bit of those flow state characteristics to me. So finding those places where there's selflessness, like hiking would be great if I was close to a mountain, that would take me out. So I'm updating my map in that respect.
It's great. The conversation piece is, I think, been the best map upgrading. And it's the same thing with, having the privilege of working with 25 CEOs and business leaders, but also having small groups and pods of people that I communicate with in my own little masterminds are so helpful, because you and I both know as men, like, we have so many blind spots, and I can't see myself until you reflect it back. Yeah. And there have been a couple of times when people reflect things back and I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. Didn't see that. Thank you for feeding that back to me.
Thank you. Thank you for the update. I love that.
Thank you for the update.
John, one other thing that you said that also has been really something that's kind of awakened inside of me, when you're talking about how this is a global pandemic, this is the first time in our history, at least since we've been alive, where
ever the asteroids that took out the dinosaurs,
Well, yeah. And that's what I'm saying is, throughout our history, that really the only thing that we can kind of relate to that's been like global in scale is maybe 9/11 or world wars. But it's usually been like, two countries or multiple countries fighting each other. This is different. This is like the movies where we see, like you said, an asteroid coming here and potentially threatening all of humanity, or like Independence Day, the movie with Will Smith, where aliens are potentially coming down. And we're all, as humans, fighting against the same thing, which in a strange sense for me is bringing this deep sense of togetherness, right? Yeah. Like in a fucked up way, but there's also the beauty of, I can feel like my brothers and sisters in all different parts of the world and their fears, because it's quite similar to what we're experiencing. And I think if I'm carrying that forward, there is something beautiful about humanity having a mass awakening and shared experience for the first time maybe in human history. And then what do we do with that going forward?
I had this memory when I was a little kid, and they used to talk about how if a butterfly flaps its wings across the globe, that effect will come and hit us here and become a hurricane. And I used to think that was a myth, right? It was like, how does a butterfly who flaps its wings, in China create a hurricane here? And I think for me, when I'm one of the paradigms and the maps that are getting upgraded that I'm not even realizing is that, we are all one. Spiritually, I get that. But as a society, there's this new paradigm that we are all connected, which to me is going to be the platform for global warming conversations to change. Mm-hmm. I think across the board, that one country that pollutes is not insulated from the globe. Like if you pollute one side of the globe, we're going to be affected by that. And so I feel like this is a paradigm that things are going to build on top of. That's the first thing I'm starting to realize, is this deep sense of interconnectedness. And like my friends in Australia, like friends in the UK, friends, we're all experiencing something, the same thing. Everybody's on this sort of like shutdown, lockdown experience. It's incredible.
Yeah. This is a catalyst for change. So, John, you mentioned the global warming conversation and how we can now view that as something that is maybe not as immediate, but is global. And I've seen this also in telemedicine regulation in the United States about doctors working across state borders. Crazy. People for years, entire nonprofits are dedicated to trying to get these laws changed so that we can get more medicine accessible across the states in rural areas and everything else. And it's just roadblock after roadblock. What was it? Andrew Yang, right? He's been pushing for this universal basic income of $1,000 a month for everybody in the US. And that sounded absolutely insane a month ago. And now it's happening. It's happening. Like literally just approved by Congress. So it's amazing to see this catalyst of change, of togetherness for the good. Because I think some of this stuff, whether universal basic income is a good idea or not a good idea, I don't know. But I do know that some of this that is changing is for the better. And I don't know how else it would have changed. We've been trying for a long time. That gives me hope.
I got a deck from my father-in-law who lives in Seoul in Korea, and his friend has the lab that can do the test in 90 minutes for COVID. So I got the deck, and they can literally send me 3,000 units per day. But, I'm trying to make some phone calls, and we could literally have this here in a week where people could literally get a 90-minute check.
Wow.
I have 2 clients that tested positive for COVID-19. And one, he went to the hospital 3 days ago, and they gave him a test. Took him 3 days to get the results. And in those 3 days, he had people in his home, his kid, he wasn't feeling so well, but, it took him 3 days to get the test, to get the results. And then he came back positive. And he said nobody would talk to him until he got a positive result. Now that he has a positive result, people will talk to him. And it's that we still are not testing everybody.
John, when you say people will talk to him, you mean like give him care?
Just anybody will respond to his email saying, "Hey, I'm having symptoms. What do I do?" No one will talk to him. Now that he's positive,
you can't get a medical provider.
Everybody wants to talk to him now that he's has a positive result.
Mm-hmm.
I truly believe that our policies are keeping us. It's really clear how antiquated our country is in so many aspects in terms of red. Yeah.
So, Bryan, I know before we started recording, one of the questions you had that seems to be coming up quite a bit is, some of the men that you're talking to feel like they're pretty steady. They're pretty much prepared to weather this storm into the foreseeable future, but there's someone in their lives that may be freaking out, right?
Yeah.
And how do we deal with that?
Yeah. These are guys that are listening to our podcast. Some of them are old friends of mine back in Chicago. And what I'm hearing is, hey, Bryan, I've got myself into a routine within this new normal. For me, that looks like powering up in the morning, and I'm doing breath work, and I'm doing meditation, and maybe even going for a run outside and keeping the body and mind straight. But other people in my household are not doing that. And in those cases, it's either their kids or their wife. And that what it's asking me is like, what do I do? Like, I'm keeping myself in a good state. How do I help others? How do I help other people in my family get to that good state too, without being that overbearing person? It's like, you need to go meditate. You need to go for a run. You need to take care of yourself. Right. And so I don't have a good answer to that. I'm curious what your thoughts and John's thoughts are on how do we help others get to a good state as well?
It's a great question. I mean, because it's hard to know, because I'm sure for everybody who's listening, the people in their homes who are kind of freaking out, there's a whole spectrum of freak out. There's a whole range. And, without knowing the actual specifics in terms of giving like hey, here's what you need to do. The first thing that I think comes to mind for me is this conversation. So if we look at the spectrum of panic and denial, I keep bringing the conversation to a middle road where I'm not trying to make someone else's experience wrong or bad or judging their panic. This is just how they're experiencing it. It's not my job to tell you how to feel about this whole entire experience. Your experience, your emotions, your feelings are totally valid. And so this first sense, this is a fantastic opportunity. So if we look at going to the gym and developing specific muscles by creating resistance, this is a fantastic opportunity to be able to stay grounded and clear about what you believe, what's important to you, and allow other people the space to have their experience without getting impacted and bombarded or fighting against someone else's experience. So for me as a coach, a lot of times I take in there and I breathe in whatever they're experiencing and I let it run through my body and I don't hold on to it. So I can have a sense of compassion and empathy, but I have a strong enough sense of myself that I don't get swallowed up in their reality, in their energy, but I'm connecting to them saying, hey, I feel your panic. I can resonate with that panic and I can acknowledge and validate and see it. And I support you without judging them and saying your panic's freaking me out. And listen, I did that the other day. I was in the car with my wife. Everything was great. She opens up, the news. She's like, oh my God, blah, blah. She doesn't speak like that, but she's like,
boy, if she hears this podcast, are you in trouble? Yeah.
And then she's just starting to spew out, boom, 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 boom. And I got really angry because I was like, I don't want that in my space. And then we got into a whole fight and this whole thing. And it's like, okay, like, how do I communicate saying, hey, listen, I totally hear your panic. Is it cool if we maybe just keep this car ride sort of separate from that for now? If that's cool. But there was a moment where I started to feel I was getting triggered by all that. I don't want that in my space. So it created a conflict between the two of us. So this is really hard. This is across the board, really, really, really challenging. Let's not underestimate the weight of the deadlift here. This is way
I love
outside
it.
what
Yeah.
we normally lift. And
Yeah.
so it needs a little bit of time of like working up to this weight and intensity. If you ever worked out with Dom, you're in for ass kicking.
Very intense. Lots of deadlifts.
Sessions to kind of work up to that level of intensity. And we're all in that transition right now.
John, do you think that one of the reasons why maybe the conflict escalated in your car was because you didn't want panic in your space, but maybe she wanted to feel secured or something, or she wanted to feel like met by you? So like you were both kind of like, here's what I want, here's what I want. And when neither of you were willing to really give each other what you wanted, that's what created some of that head knocking?
Yeah, from what her space was, she likes to stay up to date. She wants to know where things are at. That was like her kind of like map at that moment. And my map was very different. Absolutely. Yeah. And so it's just honoring her map. And this is where my work is. Can I maintain my state and allow her to do her thing without being affected by it? And that just is really a daily practice of like, especially with our partners. It's way easier for me with clients because they're not my partners. They're not like, but when it's my wife, she knows how to push all my buttons. She has the
John,
map.
let's get really tactical with this. So if a situation like that occurs, so you're saying allow them the space to feel what they're feeling, empathize with it, but let it go through us so that we don't hang on to it. What do those conversations look like? Is it being curious and asking questions? Is it providing direction? Is it asking for permission to provide direction? Like, what do those conversations look like?
So the one that I've been kind of exploring with my wife is like when I'm grounded and she's in that panic, whatever, it's not me versus her. So I've been trying to have the conversation and say, hey, listen, we are in this together as a family. And I understand that you're kind of freaked out and panicked. So what can we control? If we take a look at our family, what do we have control of and what do we not have control of? This way, as a family, we know we have our bases covered. And then there's the fear and worry about the future and next month and 2 months and what if our bills, and there's all that. And my wife and I, what we've been doing is we've been putting together sort of a yellow, green, red timeline in terms of like, what if things get to here, then what do we do? If things get to here, then what do we do? And if things are red, what do we do? And like everything from stopping paying the mortgage and, stop payments to everything if we need to. That's the red end. If this thing goes on and hurt both of our business are somehow negatively impacted, which a lot of people are. I've got clients who went to red right away. And so we put a whole plan in together to basically, if you're out in the wilderness and you're about to freeze, you got to keep your core body temperature warm. If you got to lose an arm or a leg, great, but you're still alive. So I had one client who shut 3 of his businesses and fired everybody because if he didn't do that, his whole business would go under in the periodontic space, right? I've got someone else who has the same thing. Like they just have 200 and some thousand in payroll a month. You can't continue. There's no money coming in. What do you do? So this idea, coming back to your tactical question of we're in this together. What can we control and not control? And what's our plan? And I feel like just kind of talking through multiple, banks of the river. Here's the best case. Here's the worst case. And as a family, here's what we're going to do in the best case and the worst case. I feel like the brain hates uncertainty and we are so uncertain. So having a little bit of like, okay, if this, then that, on the extremes helps my brain calibrate a little bit to what reality may look like. And my wife and I have been doing that with both of our kids, having to stay home from school for the next 3 months. If that's true, worst case scenario, what do we need to do?
I like the perspective of we're in this together. Let's just start there. That's baseline.
We're in this together. It's not you versus me, my idea.
Right. We're in this together. The reality is times are uncertain. And let's look at the specifics of the extremes. That to me is really helpful because Dominic and I were talking last night with the men's group about how there's this general cloud of fear that makes us feel a little bit crazy. And what you're talking about, John, is like, let's get clear on what that is and when that is. Red, yellow, green.
Yeah.
And let's come up with like what we think the plans are for right now. Like at what point? Beck and I were talking about, do we get out of New York? Do we stay in New York? Like CNN saying crazy things about COVID in New York, et cetera, et cetera. I said, here, like in this situation, I feel like we're in green. We're well set up. We're in a good spot. And if things started to get violent or there was no space in hospitals, then maybe then is a red situation and we make a different decision, but we're not there now. So just even having that conversation is super helpful because we're getting specific with what the facts are, what we're certain about right now, and the uncertainty going forward. So I love that frame and that model.
I've got two things that came up for me as you were talking. So number one is you were saying the brain hates uncertainty. So there's this like real emphasis on how do we create moments of certainty when we are in an uncertain environment. And like for me, it comes back to like the systems, the habits, the rituals that really ground me, right? So it's certain that I'm going to do some things before I go to bed that fill my tank. It's certain the way I'm going to wake up before I consume any news. Like I'm just trying to bring as much certainty as I possibly can to my life. And then I'm doing that with my clients as well, right? Like we're just ramping up communications. The other thing, and this has been a big theme as we talked about in the mastermind call last night, Bryan, you referenced this, is nebulous fears, right? Like these nebulous fears, meaning this cloud of fear that's really been uninspected, but like you can feel it in your body. You don't know what exactly you're afraid of. And maybe on some level, you like, I'm afraid of maybe running out of food, or I'm afraid money's not going to come in. But like those are still pretty 30,000 foot level fears. Mm-hmm. As humans, we don't like to feel fear. So many times what we will do is either we will disconnect from that fear entirely, maybe ignore like it exists, or we'll downplay it. And then like that's kind of denial, what you talked about before, John. Or like we'll spring so far into action in the doing to kind of snuff out that feeling of fear. And in both cases, like we're not metabolizing what fear really is. And so like what we have been talking about is creating space to actually like sit in stillness with the fear and like inspect what that is. You know, and I've talked on a few of the podcasts this week about like sitting with the financial fear. And there was like a nebulous fear around that. And when I actually sat down and like allowed it to come up, I could get specific around which fears were founded, which ones were unfounded. The ones that were founded, I was able to develop pretty much a number of strategies that make me feel comfortable now. So I still have a little bit of the edge of fear, but it's not commanding me. And I'm also not ignoring it either. So I'm just curious for you, John, you know, as you're hearing that and talking to maybe your clients around some of these fears, are you finding it similar that there's a lot of nebulous, uninspected fears that are causing us angst and indiscriminate action that maybe is counterproductive right now?
Yeah. So I always go back to my fear, you know, your fear, our fear is connected to our desire. So inspecting the fear and listening for what is it that we desire underneath the fear. So if I'm feeling all this fear around finances, what's the desire underneath that? To be financially insecure. That could be the desire, right? So if that's the desire, what is it that I'm doing right now? Well, first actually is what would it be like for me to be financially secure right now, and actually explore what does that state feel like? And then from that place, start to map out what are the behaviors or the things that I can be doing right now to move me towards that. Because the thing is, Sunday, I couldn't sleep, got up 4:00 in the morning, put a fire on, and I just started, because I couldn't sleep. I had all this anxiety. And part of it was the anxiety. So sometimes for me, anxiety is a call to arms. It's a deep kind of, there's actions that you're avoiding that you need to address. There are things that you are not looking at that need to be looked at squarely in the eyes. So whenever I feel a real sense of anxiety, my first internal contemplation is, what am I avoiding? What am I not dealing with? What am I not looking at? What is outside of my day-to-day in the shadows that really needs to be engaged, looked at, questioned? And so that's the first place I go with my anxiety. And when I sat with it, there was like 3 or 4 very clear things that I knew I needed to do, but I wasn't doing. So instead of laying in bed and just stirring, I got up and I did them, and I just executed them, and I felt the anxiety reduce. So there's this relationship with our anxiety, and everybody has different, you know, experiences of anxiety and sources of anxiety, and their whole kind of anxiety to me is a whole complex of things. But this relationship between what is it that deep down I'm avoiding? And it may be one of those things that's a year of a process. It's not just one action. It's like, I'm avoiding that my business model is old and I want to switch to a new business model and I don't know how. That anxiety sits because there's some deeper calling that you need to begin addressing that's going to take maybe 3 years. but we're not actually taking any steps. We're not planting seeds. We're not tilling the soil. We're not nurturing. We're not having conversations. We're not actually even addressing the process. So that, to me, that space of your fear is connected to your desire. What is it you really want? And what's a behavior that moves you towards that? To me, puts me in a proactive, intentional space. And then sitting with the anxiety, really dropping into it and saying, what is it that it's actually, if it's a call to arms and not like shotguns and, machine guns here.
Crossbows. Bryan wants crossbows.
I have talk about maps and reds. I have a friend, a good buddy of mine. He's like, hey man, I just did an ammo run because shit's going to get crazy. And I'm thinking, you are way at red, like a year early. This is, and then maybe we're not even going to be at that place. But for some people, they're going red and ammo. Really? Okay.
Watching too much Walking Dead, man.
Walking Dead, man. We're not into Walking Dead. This is not the reality we live in. So really, I love what you're talking about with your mastermind, Dom. It's really inspecting the fear, analyzing it, really getting to what is it connected to, and how do we as men stay proactive and engaged, grounded, and not frozen. So from the client spectrum, there are some people that are frozen. They know there's things that they need to do, but they haven't taken action yet. And so the anxiety and the fear and the overwhelm hits such a high level that they start taking reactive action that's not intentional. That's not strategic.
Yeah. All actions not created equal, right? Depending on where it's coming from. So if we haven't identified, and I really love this, John, because you're taking us down to like level 2, level 3 layers deep here, where it's be still, name the fear, understand it. What's the desire connected to it, right? Level 2. Level 3 is like, what is the anxiousness telling? What's the intelligence in the anxiousness? What's it telling us to do? What do we need to inspect? What are we avoiding? Right. And then moving from that space, taking action from that space, as opposed to just this reactive, I think I'm afraid of something, or I'm in denial of being afraid of something and then doing.
The thing that I'm really starting to get curious about is, how we talked about this unification, this paradigm shifting, that we are a global, we are all connected globally. I feel like there is a new birth to a relationship to anxiety, because right now anxiety paradigm is that it's bad. And that we shouldn't have it, and we should be doing things medication wise to reduce our anxiety. And what I feel is that it's almost like the yin yang kind of, something has to go fully to its maximum for it to transform. And I feel like anxiety right now, we're going to break through a new way to relate to anxiety and welcome it in. Instead of trying to push it out and get it away, we are actually doing the opposite, where we're trying to bring ourselves closer to it, welcome it, give it a space, listen to it, and look at it not as a pathology, but actual an intelligence, and welcome it into the whole conversation. Because I have anxiety, but I also have a part of me that's just like open and excited and curious and powerful. And they're both me. They're all parts of me. And right now, I think people have disconnected, dissociated, and judged the part that has anxiety. And it's now about bringing it into the conversation. If I have a table, I wanted a seat at the table, but I don't want it to be the only voice I'm listening to.
Yeah.
I want to listen to the part of me that's deep and grounded and connected. The part of me that's really scared, and, part of me that's like all these parts that I have, all these parts that live inside of us. That's a whole level 4 kind of there, Bryan.
I love this, man, because, 2 of the most important books of my life, one of them being The Way of the Superior Man, the other one, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. They talk about this, like what you're saying, they're talking specifically about fear or resistance. Anxiety is intricately connected to those. And they talk about fear and resistance being a compass. It's a guide for what you should be looking at, or what the next big game in your life you should be playing. I spoke about this in a podcast I released about like facing fear. David Deida has a chapter number 8, about leaning just beyond your edge in everything that you do. And he said, most men kind of bounce between 2 extremes of fear. Either they deny it, right, disconnect from it, or they go like way overboard into action and make their lives like, almost like martyrs. Like they just go way too hard. And either way, you're not metabolizing the experience. If you are living at your edge, then you actually should feel fear ubiquitously. But it's not like a fear that cripples you. It's not a fear that commands you. It's a fear that says, no, like you are leaning out over your edge, which is where growth occurs. When you're leaning out over your edge, this is when you're the most attractive to the partner in your life. This is when you're most sexually desirable. Like, think about that. Like, think about the times I know personally, like when I've been living out over my edge, like that's where I'm most magnetic. That's also when I feel most alive. And so I spent most of my life exactly the way you described, John, which was when I felt fear or anxiety, I would numb it out through my compulsive behaviors. And the only thing that happens over a long period of time is that anxiety gets stronger, and it eventually will wake you the fuck up, and usually not some very compassionate ways. I would love if this is the beginning of an awakening to say, you know what, this thing that we label anxiety and bad now has a seat at the table. We will listen to it before it brings out its TNT dynamite sticks and wants to blow everything up because we've just been ignoring it for so long.
Mm-hmm. Dude, there is one thing that's very clear to me in this moment, Dominic, and that is the caffeine is working in John right now. Yeah, it is fully integrated. Like, he is just rolling 5 layers deep. I mean, wow.
I'm sorry. It's a COVID cough.
Not a symptom.
Not a symptom. That is a symptom, actually. Oh, boy.
John, can you hold your breath? Can you hold your breath for 10 seconds?
You know, apparently that's a bunch of bullshit. That's what I heard.
Is it?
It seems like one of those bullshitty kind of things. Yeah.
I have a client who's got it and he can't breathe and he held his breath for 10 seconds. So I don't know. You know, there's so much information. People tell you that.
Yeah.
I have no idea. Yeah. Who knows? I can hold my breath for a while.
But yes.
We're not going to do that on this podcast. That sounds like very boring podcasting, actually.
Yeah. Let's do a hold your breath competition on the podcast. All right, guys. I mean, we're kind of near the end here. Is there anything anything else that we haven't covered that, John, that like you're just feeling compelled to now that your caffeine is coursing through your veins?
So working with a guy yesterday, and we sat with the question, what is now possible that never was possible before for me? Like, what is the opportunity that's emerging? So if we look at the Chinese word for crisis, it's 2 characters. It's danger and opportunity. So if we take a look at every crisis, within it has the seed of an opportunity. That's not denying the danger. We're acknowledging the danger, but we're also acknowledging the opportunity simultaneously. It's a paradox. And I think as men, one is the ability to hold contradictory states simultaneously. So I can both be curious, excited, playful, and fucking scared out of my goddamn wits simultaneously. And as men, the most confusing thing I'm seeing people is they don't know how to feel. They're kind of confused on, should I feel this? Should I feel that? I'm this, I'm that. It's like, well, I'm both, man. I'm experiencing both simultaneously. So allowing these contradictory paradoxical states to happen simultaneously. And number 2 is really sitting with the question, what is the opportunity seed that sits in this crisis for me personally, but also maybe for the world? I mean, I love Peter Diamandis, what he said, like, this is an opportunity to really question, what are the challenges the world is facing and how can I help solve those? That's a big question. I haven't been asking that question as much. It's been a lot more in my own kind of sphere, but I would love to start exploring as a global system. What are the challenges that we're facing and how can I contribute to solving them?
Yeah. Peter Diamandis has some of those big questions. And he's, I referenced him yesterday when someone was talking about financial fears. In his book, Bold, he talks about how almost everybody has access to an extra $100,000 based on their social connections. You just have to get creative, like know who to ask and how. It's not all going to come from one source. And there could be like barters, right? Like trades that could be made to access that money. That's not related to necessarily to what you were just saying, but like his wisdom is pretty profound and useful in this period of time. So like you could probably go on and like follow him on Instagram like I do, or YouTube, because he is a big thinker. I mean, like his ideas are, how do you impact 1 billion people in the next 10 years? That's how he thinks, and on almost every project that he decides to take on.
Yeah. We went through that whole exercise, my wife and I. It's like, where could we have access to cash? It's like a home equity line of credit. We can, there's all these different things where we had to, 200 grand, 300 grand that we can access if we need to in an emergency situation. If we get to the red zone, we can hold out for several months.
Yeah.
The other thing too is when things go back to normal, which they will, it reminds me when I have a toothache, all I can think about is my toothache and my whole entire world is distorted from this pain. But once the tooth is fixed, I no longer think about my teeth, and maybe I won't floss as much, and maybe I'm not brushing as well, and maybe I'm not caring for my teeth, even though I had a terrible toothache. So I think this time is really capturing, what is it that you could have done that would have put you in a better position today? And that might be having 6 months of cash flow in an account, right? So that when things do go back to normal, you go, wow, you know what? This is going to happen again. This is a new normal. These pandemics are going to happen. So if it does happen again, how do I want to be set up? With my business, financially, what is it that I can do when things go back to normal that I can shift in case this does happen again?
John, I'm working with several companies, and it sounds like some of your clients are in a similar position with decisions that have to be made around cash flow and employees. This idea of reactive nature of not exploring some of this fear is causing some people to just like, we need to let go of half of our workforce. Like, let's go, let's do it.
Exactly.
Right. The alternative is, and where I'm providing some guidance to some of these companies, is hitting the exact point that you're talking about right now. Like, what happens when we go back to normal? Because we will. Are you setting yourself up right now for that to excel and to create? Or are you going to be scrambling just to get back to normal when we're there? Yeah, it's a really big distinction. So for some of the guidance that we have related to employers, it's like, if you need to fire, furlough, defer payment, like, are you getting creative with it? Are you having the conversation with the employee about where they're at? And are you setting your company up both culturally and financially to be ready for that normal when it comes back?
So true. I have one guy, he basically told his whole staff, he's like, we are staggering, so we don't have to let you go. We are reducing the pay, and then we'll figure out a way to slowly, increase your compensation maybe over a year or 2 or 3 to kind of bake it back in. There are all these creative ways where one client, with his employees are saying, listen, we are going to pause payments, but you're going to have a job. Because if you get fired now, where are you going? No one's going to hire you. There is no hiring. So when things go back to normal, you still have a job. I can't pay you, but you still have a job and you're still going to work. You have to get really creative, and there, again, this is unprecedented. There are a million ways to set this up.
When there's more than one person involved, being creative takes both parties.
It does. Yeah.
And so having that conversation, there's a gym here in Williamsburg called Willie B Fitness. It's where I go to work out. They emailed all of us, like all the other gyms, and said, hey, we are putting all your memberships on pause so you don't have to pay. And then when we open back up, obviously we'll turn your account back on. We then got an email about 3 hours afterwards that said, wow, the outpouring from this community has been amazing. For those of you that said you want to continue paying so the employees can stay funded, we really appreciate it, and we'll let your membership roll. So I love that story, because if Willie B had first actually reached out and asked the question of, do you want to keep it rolling, or where are you at financially, there would have been some creative things. Now, thank God the community stepped up and said, hey, we want to keep our $55 a month going so that we can keep, because we want the gym around. When the new normal comes back, we want that community gym around.
It's the same thing. Basically, if everybody stopped paying their jiu-jitsu membership, there'd be no gym to come back to.
That's exactly it.
Now, I have several of those that are relying on me to keep them afloat, right? So then I have to be mindful, with my son's School of Rock. These are musicians that teach there. If I stop paying, they're not gigging. They're screwed. So, again, it's like being mindful of what I can and can't do and what my boundaries are, what my capabilities, my capacity is financially. I am supporting all these places, but.
Yeah. And I think this is probably a great place to jump off, because this all chunks up back to, like you were saying, John, if we pull back the lens and not just look at like the days in front of us, but that this presumably will go back to a new normal, and it will be a new type of normal. It will never be the same again. Then are we setting ourselves up to live into a normal that we're excited about? And people will remember how we behaved during this time, right? Like your employees will remember how you treated them.
Right.
Your family will remember how you treated them. And so it's every single day, are we showing up in the best version of ourselves? Because that's really, these are the times that define who we are. So I really appreciate, Bryan, you jumping on, John, you jumping on, providing like a really thoughtful discussion around some of the questions that are bubbling up in our communities. And I hope you guys who are listening really find this to be useful, and hopefully we'll be able to do this again in the not too distant future.
Yeah, Dom, that point of a year from now, when you look back at this time, what are the memories you want to have? My wife was showing me some video of a guy who's like really hot and he's dancing, pre self-isolation. And then 6 months later, he's like 300 pounds. And so like last night I realized like I haven't worked out in a week, usually because I do jiu-jitsu 4 days a week. That's my workout. So at like 11:30 at night, I rode for 20 minutes and I squatted. My wife's like, why are you getting out of bed? I'm like, because I just don't want to look back at this time and be like, dude, you just got totally out of shape. Like I have not been working out because I've been scrambling with my family and there's a lot of stuff to manage, but that's just a narrative and a story that I had. And so like, I was like, I want to look back at this time where I got buff and strong and grounded. And in order for me to do that, I have to do certain things. Like I got to squat, I got to row, I got to work out. You know, I can't think my way into a fit body. I got to act my way into it. So I wish I could think my way.
No, it'd be amazing.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah. All right, fellas. Great job today.
Awesome.
Hey, Bryan and I wanted to thank you for the ratings and reviews that you leave us. We read every single one of them, and they're so helpful in helping us to understand what resonates with you and helps us determine which topics that we use in the future. So if you found this episode to be of particular value to you, will you please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts so that we know that this is the kind of topic you want to hear more about? And it also helps other prospective listeners to figure out where they can dive in first. Thank you.